I want to put two stories together here because there were two different sort of reports on games that most of us know, most of us love, in terms of the numbers that they're putting up. And the first story was an update on Apex. Apex Legends hits $2 billion in earnings with continued growth. So Apex putting up big numbers years after release. This was on their earnings call, EA's earnings call. Confirmed the game passed the $2 billion mark in total earnings. So that's $2 billion over about 3 years. It's growing, so the game continues to grow, and revenue increased by 40% compared to the year before. And that season 12, which is the most recent, was the game's most successful ever. And executives expect Apex Legends will eventually make $1 billion a year. The one thing that's coming out later this month is Apex Legends Mobile. So that'll be interesting to see how that does. But they're projecting $1 billion a year eventually for the Apex Legends franchise. Now, I wanted to put this next to another story because 2 billion sounds like a really big number. And then I saw this story, which is, PUBG Mobile surpasses 7.5 billion in total revenue. So since infancy, since its inception, 7.5 billion earned, and that 57% or roughly 4.7 billion comes purely from its Chinese player base, where the game is called Game for Peace. So funny given what the game is about. And so PUBG Mobile, $7.5 billion over, I want to say a slightly longer time frame. It's not in this article, and I'm trying to remember the exact year where PUBG Mobile was launched, but it would have been relatively like a 3 or 4 year kind of, I'll just confirm, or if someone can confirm. Release date 2018, so over a 4 year period.
Wow.
Curious what you guys make of these two stories, right? Like these are the big success stories. This is, I guess, what 100 Thieves is hoping for. But any interesting thoughts on PUBG Mobile versus something like Apex Legends? Given we all look at things from a North American lens sometimes, and you wouldn't think that PUBG Mobile has done almost 4 times the revenue. Any thoughts on this, Jimmy or Jeff? Go ahead.
Jimmy, you can go if you have thoughts.
Oh, I mean, the only thing I wanted to say was I played the new season of Apex last night, and it's awesome. I mean, I'm a big fan of Apex, and I like seeing it do well. Apex obviously hasn't been out as long as PUBG, and there's something to be said that this is also shows the strength of PUBG going mobile. But to your point, Paul, or rather to that statistic on the Chinese contribution to PUBG success, how much I would love to have seen how hurt that was over the last 6 or so months when all these crackdowns in China started happening, because that's a huge chunk of what PUBG is probably relying on, and something that they probably didn't see. So that also is actually an impressive number then, considering it was probably a lot less recently, right, in recent times. But Jeff, that was really my only thought on that.
Those are sort of in line with what I had to say. I'm curious, Jimmy, if you will try the Apex Mobile now that it's out, or have you tried it?
Haven't tried it yet. For first-person shooters, I don't like it on mobile as much. I like mobile for, like I play Clash Royale every single day. But for FPS games, I don't play with the controller. Even I'm on mouse and keyboard on that, so I don't know if I will play that.
Does anyone think Apex will catch up to sort of will Apex Legends Mobile allow Apex to catch up to PUBG as a franchise in terms of total earnings? Lindsay?
I don't necessarily think it will, but I have been impressed with Apex's staying power, and every season has been really popular, and they've really captured a strong market here. And I mean, 2 billion is nothing to really sneeze at for especially a first-person shooter, when the market can tend to be really crowded for them and can get replacements really quickly. Apex still seems to have a really crazy staying power in North America. I am curious to see if they can capture that on mobile. My suspicion is that they kind of won't, because like we've pointed out, a lot of these markets are international markets that are already dominated by PUBG. And I'm just not so sure that the first-person shooter mobile market or the shooter mobile market in North America, where Apex is primarily centered right now, is that good. I don't know that they have the mobile power to unseat the other regions, but I'm definitely thoroughly impressed with the staying power that Apex has had, and it's amidst all of the Call of Duty sucks and games being released and all of that. It's like even with new releases, people will play for a month and then go right back to Apex. So whatever they are doing, it's working really well. I don't necessarily think that will translate into mobile, but why not try it? They have a good thing going.
Wenji says, Apex is the only game I still play regularly. It's just slick. Other friends have come back recently too, anecdotally. Love the game. I wanted, like, I wish there was some learning to tease from this, right? Is it that starting with PC first is still the path? Like, because keep in mind, both these games started on PC first. PUBG was on PC first, Apex on PC first, and then you figure out once you hit success, then you use mobile as sort of the cash-in kind of mechanism. Does anyone think that this is a model we may see more of? That, you know, or is this a dying breed? Is this like any learnings from these two, or anything you like from one versus the other?
I think it makes sense. You build a franchise with kind of your hardest core players on like the most like high impact device, and then you sort of broaden the funnel once people know the brand, and you expose it to more people, particularly in other regions. So I think that sort of makes sense. It'll be interesting to see, like, you know, for a while mobile shooters didn't work, and then you started to have some that did well, like Free Fire and PUBG Mobile, and it was kind of like, you know, the question I think a lot of people had was like, okay, were those sort of unicorns, and maybe they were only popular in regions where there isn't people really don't have PCs or consoles, and like, will those people transition at some point? I think we had this debate many times. You know, will those people transition to PC console at some point? And then you had like Call of Duty Mobile came out and did pretty well in the West and has kind of had staying power. And now we're kind of seeing this next generation. I think we have Rainbow Six Siege coming out on mobile, Battlefield eventually coming out on mobile, obviously Apex. So like, it'll be interesting to see whether those early ones kind of just like saturated the market, or if this is the pattern that you just said, where you take these massive franchises and bring them to mobile. I don't know if I have a take on it yet, but that's kind of what we're seeing.
I think the PC players do have a halo effect. I think the rest of the player base looks and says, I want to be that someday, and being able to play on your phone feels like you're a part of that in a small way, right? Same way, not everyone can afford a $20,000 Chanel handbag, but you can go buy a $200 pair of sunglasses, right? And a lot of people can afford that. And so, it's how I look at the interaction between these two, and it's sort of proven out by these two games, which I think is interesting. And remains to be seen how much of an increase Apex Legends Mobile will give to that franchise. But I suspect it should follow about the PUBG kind of curve in the same way. One last question on this. The CFO at EA said $1 billion a year for Apex Legends. How many years do we think these kinds of franchises will last? Do you think any of them will have CSGO, WoW, staying power? Is anyone confident that the $1 billion a year is more than just next year?
I mean, it's still growing. Like, why? It's a live service, so if anything, the game should get better, right? The more content, the more heroes, as long as it stays balanced. You're updating graphics and stuff. Like, in theory, it should continue to grow. Obviously, nothing grows forever, but like, it will be harder, just like in general theory of network effects and like compounding, almost like compounding a moat. Like, it will be harder for some incumbent to knock off Apex in 2 years or 3 years after more development time, more, iteration and polishing and building the lore, and maybe they'll make a TV series. Like, it should be harder to knock someone off then than it was the first year. Nothing lasts forever, but I don't know.
Wenji says, is it more that if your game is good on PC, it's probably already a good game, mechanics, story, experience, so more likely a hit, i.e. you're picking winners to transfer. There's a lot of mobile-only games that have done incredibly well, but assume the success rate is low compared to PC ports. It could just be that the denominator in mobile-only games is so high, right? There's just so much that gets put out there. such volume that if we're looking at it as a success rate, as a percentage, that it's low compared to PC ports, Wenji. But your point's a good one. Jimmy, you were going to say something?
Oh, I mean, I'm just curious the difference in expense in making a mobile game and a PC game. And then I was also thinking, like when Overwatch was struggling, we saw a lot of players go to Valorant. We saw a lot of players go to CSGO. Even when PUBG wasn't at the top anymore and when Fortnite kind of replaced it, I thought PUBG did a great job retaining its loyal followers and still being relevant within its own community. So I think there's something to be said about the type of genre, the type of game that PUBG created. I don't see them going away, but we don't know what that next game out there is because there's only so many hours in the day, and people are going to play the next best thing. Even when Warzone was at the top, I didn't see either of these two really struggle. I mean, these are great numbers. They're putting up great numbers, and I think Krafton in particular, right? Like they need PUBG to do well for them to do well. EA doesn't really need, I think, Apex to do well for EA to do as well, like comparatively. But but that doesn't mean that they want to lose all the ground.
At $1 billion a year, this is starting to have a pretty major impact on the company's bottom line, right?
Yeah, so I think they're happy with that. I don't know if they expect that or they're not that or not. I'm sure they, that's always the goal is to succeed and do well. But yeah, it's starting to become significant. So they're going to do what they can and what they need to do to keep it to keep it relevant. And so as an Apex fan, I hope so. But I think both of these guys have unique games that aren't just your typical FPS, like a typical throwaway FPS. I don't get the same fix or feeling playing other FPSs as I do when I play Apex, which is why I continue to play it versus like we were saying with Overwatch. I think a lot of people found that going to CSGO, going to Valorant. So I think it's also about just what does the game do or what can it continue to do with new seasons, new battle passes, new releases and things of that nature to keep their audience, because they've both done a good job, I think, building this loyal following.